First Lady, in an effort to get more Missourians out of doors, initiated the 100-mile challenge last year. It was a tremendous success. And at this time, ladies and gentlemen, please help me give a warm welcome to Missouri's 55th governor, Governor Jay Nixon.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. For those of you that aren't watching on the 100-mile challenge, we're eerily close to 20,000 Missourians and 2 million miles walked, and the First Lady remains 52 miles ahead of me. I did have knee surgery this year, so she got a couple of weeks where I couldn't keep up with her on crutches. But Bob, thank you for your kind introduction. Also, thank you for your service to our state. I want to specifically thank these 4 commissioners for their tireless commitment over their entire lives. They are not here at this point by accident. When you look at the 4 commissioners that represent the vast regions of our state, they bring a wealth of experience, a depth of commitment, and all of them are pretty opinionated too. And so you're guaranteed to have a commission that is doing what it was designed to do. Is having folks, citizens, spend some of their time making sure that we pass the baton on to the next level. So I thank these commissioners for their public service. I want to thank the Conservation Commission for having me speak today with this important message. And it's great to look out over this room and see so many friends from all the various groups involved in the outdoor world of our great state. When it comes to the outdoors, we are not Democrats or Republicans, liberals or conservatives, just people who are deeply committed to preserving our state's fish, forest, and wildlife. It's fitting that we're gathered in the historic Tiger Hotel, where a meeting took place in this very room 80 years ago that charted a course for the restoration and conservation of Missouri's beloved natural resources. I want to also a member of my cabinet's back here, Sarah Parker Paul. I appreciate seeing Sarah. The lights were bright here. She was not here at that meeting, but if she was alive, then she would have been, if you know what I'm saying. We had to kind of make sure we had this in between various seasons where she would be outside. But no, I appreciate Sarah Parker Pauley's great leadership. On September 10th of 1935, some 100 sportsmen and conservationists gathered in this very room to discuss the sorry state of Missouri's landscape and what to do about it. We are honored today that one of those people, Bill Crawford, who was 17 at the time, is with us today. Bill, thank you for... Let me go back just a little before Bill, so I got to get farther back than him, otherwise he'll be the only historian in the room. When Lewis and Clark came through here in the early 1800s, far before Bill was born, their journals told of the bountiful wilderness they discovered. Clear water with ample fish, healthy trees, grasses, and flowering shrubs. Abundant wildlife in the air and on the land, deer and bears, elk and buffalo. But by the 1930s, when those Missourians here met here, more than a century of abuse had ravaged the landscape those explorers discovered. Lumber companies cut the vast forest to build railroads spreading across a growing country. The world's largest lumber mill was going full steam in tiny Grandin, Missouri. Historic photos show workers walking across the rafts of railroad ties as they were floated down rivers to the mill, the largest mill in the world, okay? After the trees were cut, early settlers tried to plant crops and raise goats and pigs on the rocky soil that really was good for only growing trees and wildflowers. Each rain eroded the barren hillsides into the valleys and choked the streams with gravel, filling in the deep emerald pools that were once home to fish and other aquatic life. And relentless commercial hunting and indiscriminate shooting of whatever moved emptied the woods and fields of wildlife. By the time these sportsmen met in this hotel, in this room, to discuss the problem. Deer numbers were estimated at not more than 2,000 animals in our entire state, with some 3,500 wild turkeys scattered across 45 counties. It was a dark time for Missouri outdoors. And for our state to find a brighter day, it had to blaze a new trail, led by those who could be trusted with the highest responsibility of protecting and preserving our beloved natural resources. So nearly 8 decades ago, Missouri sportsmen and conservationists, just like the folks in the room today, came together and formed the Restoration and Conservation Federation of Missouri. They devised a unique plan to bring back Missouri's forests and wildlife and set them free from day-to-day politics. Instead of a law which could be changed or repealed, or an amendment through the legislature which could be whittled away by special interests, they wrote a constitutional amendment themselves and submitted it to the vote of the people of the Show Me State. On November 3rd of 1936, that amendment was approved by more than 70% of the voters. At that time, the largest margin by which any amendment to the state constitution had ever passed. The amendment replaced the old state Game and Fish Department with the Missouri Conservation Commission. The commission had a directive to create an independent, nonpartisan conservation department that would make decisions based on sound science and time-tested practices, and free of all the political whims and commercial interests. The department was given the mandate to manage, restore, and conserve all of the state's wildlife, not just game animals. Now, in 1976, Missouri citizens passed another important constitutional amendment. It created a 1/8 of 1% sales tax to fund the programs of the Missouri Department of Conservation. Some of you in this room today were instrumental in this process. And as your governor, I've been honored to work with you to carry on and strengthen Missouri's strong outdoor traditions. Today, looking at that arc of history, the results of these efforts are as clear as the current river as it starts in Montauk. Drive across the Ozarks today and you will see hill after forested hill spreading to the horizon. Those hills are covered with a lush growth of timber that supports a thriving wood products industry while still responsibly managing the resource. State and federal forestry departments work with soil and water districts to manage land for a sustainable crop without the need for large clear cuts. They provide aid and advice to help private landowners do exactly the same. In these wild hills and hollows, we now have a diverse and growing array of wildlife: bears and bobcats, coyotes and quail, turkey and elk, and of course, the white-tailed deer. Remember those 2,000 deer in 1935? In the last hunting season, more than 200,000 deer were harvested in this state. And there were some people that were complaining that that was a low number. Okay. Missouri's total deer population is estimated at some 1.3 million today. And those 3,500 turkeys, this spring alone, hunters in Missouri bagged more than 47,000 of these wonderful birds. Missouri's estimated wild turkey population of 600,000 consistently places our state among the nation's top turkey hunting states. Conservation efforts have also allowed millions of anglers to take advantage of Missouri's diverse fishing opportunities. One of my favorites is a result of a successful collaboration between conservation and Missouri state parks to provide trout fishing at our 3 terrific state parks. This partnership has made Montauk, Bennett Spring, and Roaring River 3 of our most popular state parks, drawing 1.6 million visitors alone just last year. Missouri's healthy and abundant wildlife has spurred a renewed interest in our treasured outdoor traditions and inspired a whole new generation of sportsmen and women. In fact, Missouri is in the top 10 in the nation in rankings of both resident and non-resident hunters. And each year, more and more young Missourians participate in our annual youth hunting seasons. Participation in firearms youth deer season has gone up 38% since 2009. Folks, that is a stunning number. At a time in which all parts of this country are losing some of this outdoor tradition, because of the fine work of you and these folks and the ethos of our state, we're actually not just passing on a conservation ethic to the next generation, we are strengthening it and growing it, along the way. When I took office in 2009, I started a new tradition of inviting young hunters to participate in a governor's youth turkey hunt each spring and a deer hunt in the fall. And the stories off that you all are very well aware of. That same year in 2009, we marked the 100th anniversary of Governor Herbert Hadley's canoe expedition to promote tourism in the Ozarks by taking a float trip down that same current river, which, thanks to your efforts, is as clean and clear as it was back in 1909. The responsible management of our natural resources packs a significant punch for our economy as well. The state's 500,000 hunters have an economic impact of $1 billion annually and support thousands of jobs across our state. This success is not the result of some accident or coincidence. It is the result of a deliberate, thoughtful stewardship by generations of Missourians, united in the belief that the privilege we've been given to share in the blessing of God's creation also comes with a solemn responsibility to leave this place better than we found it. Now, unfortunately, the two strong and until now unchallenged pillars of this success, conservation's constitutional authority to manage our wildlife resources and the revenue source needed to carry it out, are both at risk right now by legislation passed in the final hours of the legislative session. First, let me discuss why revenue is in jeopardy. As I said a moment ago, in 1976, voters approved a 1/8% sales tax to fund the programs of the Missouri Department of Conservation. Anytime an item is sold that is subject to sales tax, it puts money into the department so it can continue its mission. That's what the people voted on. That's where the money goes. That's what they do. It's been that way for nearly 40 years. It's been a dedicated, predictable, and sustainable revenue stream. And even when the revenues plummeted in the height of the recession, conservation made the tough but necessary choices that we all had to make to weather that downturn. I thank them for those tough choices. It wasn't easy. But in the waning hours of this past legislative session, the General Assembly went on a special interest spending spree, passing more than a dozen special breaks for a wide array of special interests: fast food restaurants, power companies, personal seat licenses at stadiums, and dry cleaners, just to name a few. And if you're wondering why you missed the committee hearings on these bills, it's because in many cases there weren't any, nor were there fiscal notes, demonstrating a stunning lack of fiscal restraint and a complete disregard for the legislative process. The General Assembly loaded up and passed many of these special breaks without a public hearing or even a fiscal estimate of their costs. And while this grab bag of giveaways would benefit only a select few interests, its fiscal impact would be significant and far-reaching, reducing state and local revenues by a whopping $776 million annually. It's important to understand the impact, the direct impact they would have on conservation. Most of these special tax breaks are sales tax exemptions, special carve-outs that let certain individuals and businesses off the hook from paying the sales tax the rest of us have to pay. Okay? And when more and more items are exempted from sales tax, it means less revenue is available to fund these things than the voters approved. In this case, the Department of Conservation. In fact, if these sales tax exemption bills were to become law, funding for the Department of Conservation would be reduced by $12.3 million each and every year. Okay? Based on projected revenue growth, that comes to more than $137 million over the next 10 years being stripped from the department's budget to give special interest breaks to personal seat licenses, utility companies. I mean, this misguided set of last-minute giveaways would have real consequences. Money could go to habitat restoration for quail would instead go to dry cleaners. And the exemption they made for dry cleaners was in order to get a good sales tax exemption for them, they said that dry cleaning was manufacturing. Okay? I don't know about y'all, but when I drop my shirt off, I don't want to manufacture anything. I want to get the same one back, but that's. But unfortunately, the threats to conservation from this year's legislative session don't end there. And that's why I left plenty of ink in my pen. And earlier this morning, I vetoed Senate Bill 506 and House Bill 1326. Tucked into these agriculture omnibus bills is a provision that strikes at the very heart that everything that people in this room and previous generations have fought for, all to appease a single special narrow interest. These bills would redefine the term livestock in Missouri statutes to include captive cervids, or deer, and put them into the same classification as cattle and other domesticated animals. The inclusion of this language in each of these massive bills would fundamentally transform our approach to conservation in this state and undermine the progress the people in this room, both in 1935 and today, have worked so hard to build. Now, there are many ways in which this seemingly small change would have a significant and far-reaching impact. And in my message to the General Assembly, I laid out 3 specific reasons why Senate Bill 506 and House Bill 1326 pose a direct and very real threat to conservation in our state. The first is obvious. Deer are not livestock. On the other side of the equation, just as poultry farmers don't raise turkeys and then release them for people to call, bottom line, a deer is not a cow. Just try to milk one. Second, by stripping the Conservation Commission of its authority over the Missouri's deer herd and shifting that responsibility to the Department of Agriculture, these bills would violate our state's constitution and reverse the hard-fought progress we have made. When more than 70% of Missourians voted to grant the commission its broad constitutional authority back in 1936, I'm certain they never contemplated that this clear mandate could be subverted by a few legislators deciding to call a deer something it is clearly not. In fact, short-sighted and cynical assaults like this are the very reason why conservation must and shall remain a strong and independent custodian of our state's most time-honored traditions and precious resources. We can't say to these commissioners, we hold you to a higher standard, and then let the day-to-day drubbings of day-to-day politics mess with them, okay? Independence means something. If they're going to make long-term decisions, then they shouldn't have to be dealing with term-limited, short-term mindsets. The third significant problem with Senate Bill 506 and House Bill 1326 is the way these bills would thwart the effective efforts currently underway to protect Missouri's deer herd from chronic wasting disease, which has now spread to dozens of states and Canada. In 2002, the department began testing Missouri deer for CWD. And between that time and 2010, 0 Missouri native deer tested positive. But in 2010 and 2011, CWD was detected at private big game ranches in Lynn and Macon counties and in free-ranging deer killed close by, with the discovery of 11 positives inside the fence and 10 positives in deer just outside the fence. So 0 up to that time, 21 in those 2 years. And quickly and effectively to stop the disease from spreading, creating a 6-county containment zone and working with landowners, hunters, and game ranchers. The department has spent more than $1 million in the last 4 years trying to detect and manage this disease. And to this point, these efforts have been successful. But rather than build on this success, these 2 bills would dismantle it. By redefining deer as livestock and attempting to strip conservation of its authority, this ill-conceived legislation wouldn't merely fly in the face of common sense, our Constitution, and longstanding tradition, it would also jeopardize Missouri's outdoor economy. Wisconsin, Wyoming, and Colorado have already been devastated by the presence of CWD. In Wyoming, mule deer in some areas have an infection rate as high as 50%. Areas of Wisconsin have an infection rate of 1 in 4 deer, with models suggesting it could go as high as 40% of the herd infected. Because of CWD in Wisconsin has lost an estimated $50 million in 1 year alone since discovering the disease. But it's not just about lost revenues. It's also about the hunting tradition that has passed from generation to generation. Lose those game animals, you lose a legacy. We cannot stand by and watch 80 years of successful conservation practices be eroded by a narrow commercial interest. We cannot head back to the bad old days when wildlife decisions were made by officials worried about the next election rather than professionals committed to doing what's best for the next generation and the ones to follow that. They're keeping me on a script today to keep my tone down. Okay? This destructive measure would violate our state constitution, divide the will of the voters, and undermine longstanding successful conservation practices, and quite frankly, they just simply cannot become law. The fastest way to get back to where we were was very clear. There's another insidious idea behind much of what is driving notions like this in Jefferson City, overarching. A misguided belief that all government, that all regulations are inherently bad. Mother Nature obviously had a significant role to play in bringing back the game animals, as well as songbirds and other wildlife to Missouri. But she had a significant helping hand from the state and federal agencies that created the parks, the conservation areas, and the nearly 1.5 million acres of national forest across our great state. And yes, these areas and others are regulated to make sure there is a healthy habitat for deer, turkey, otters, songbirds, and every other creature that makes up the delicate web of life. And let's not kid ourselves, if we didn't do that, we'd be back where we were 80 years ago. In return, it provides a wealth of experience for all Missourians, not to mention an opportunity to get kids off their phones, off the couch, and into the great outdoors. Today, float an Ozark River, and it's not unusual to see an osprey or a bald eagle soaring overhead. If you're lucky, you might see a hellbender and endangered Ozark salamander that the Conservation Department is protecting in our spring-fed streams. Black bears are returning to our healthy forests. And now at Peck Ranch in southern Missouri, you can even hear the bugling of elk in the Ozarks. I've had the opportunity to see these majestic animals roaming our Missouri hillsides. I highly recommend it. And because of the conservation efforts to study and reestablish these native animals, it's my prediction that we will likely soon have hunting seasons for them, which is also interesting to everyone in this room, I would imagine. Missouri's Conservation Department is the envy of other states. Among those who have praised it is a conservationist who defined the concept of the ethical use of land and natural resources, the late Aldo Leopold. Leopold addressed a gathering in Missouri in 1947. I'd like to close with a quote from what he said. Conservation at bottom rests on the conviction that there are things in this world more important than dollar signs and ciphers. Many of these things attach to the land and to the life that is on it and in it. People who know these things have been growing scarcer, but less so in Missouri than elsewhere. He went on to say, that is why conservation is possible here. If conservation can become a living reality, it can do so in Missouri. This is because Missourians, in my opinion, are not completely industrialized in mind and spirit, and I hope they never will be. So today, the responsibility is ours to carry on this tradition and defend it from misguided policies like these contained in Senate Bill 506 and House Bill 1326, and in these sales tax exemptions that would drain the coffers of the Conservation Department. It is important to note that sometimes we all have a chance to define history, and sometimes history defines us. Sometimes you are on offense, which is what they're doing and what you're doing to try to make this state better. But sometimes when people come to your neighborhood and try to mess with 80 years of success, a lesson needs to be learned there also. So, just as our predecessors did when they gathered in this room nearly 80 years ago, today, specifically, between now and September 15th in the veto session, we confront another direct and dangerous threat to the outdoor heritage we all treasure. And we must be equally as committed to overcoming it, A, because it's vital that we do so, and B, so that the next 80 years, we can spend our time back on offense. If we got to do 2 months on defense, so be it. But let's be offensive about our defense. And I would say to each person here, don't trust the groups you belong to or your neighbors to press this issue. Don't trust these people or conservation or anybody else. Everybody here has a shared responsibility and an equally shared responsibility to communicate directly to the folks that are involved in this, that they made a mistake and they have an opportunity to rectify that by not overriding my vetoes on these measures. We need to be very clear and very quick. So I give this, I'll finish here. I said I was going to finish, but I'll really finish. To each one of you out there. Everybody talks about the Constitution of the United States being the best document ever written. We're all real proud of it, and it is for government organization. But I think it's important as we talk about history to take just a minute and see how it got here and what the problems with it were. We won the war, became independent, and the first document we drafted to form a country didn't work. The conservation, the Articles of Confederation did not work. So we had to come back in 1789 and do it again. Have a constitutional convention and write a whole nother constitution. And everybody, after seeing a war to declare independence, writing a document, seeing it didn't work, rewriting another document, got it right the second time. Except, after all that work, even when they were done, they still didn't get it right. They forgot some stuff. So they had to come back and pass the Bill of Rights, because they didn't put in the Constitution those necessary rights, which need to be part of that document. Why do I say the obvious to you all here? Because the first of those mistakes that they fixed is the First Amendment. Every one of you have that power. In the next 60 days, use it, okay? You can speak. Please do so. These are important matters. Don't say, oh, I belong to an organization, they wrote a letter to somebody, so that's handled. Or this is us. I mean, the citizens formed this, the people voted on it. It's at threat. It's our responsibility to defend it. In 2 short months, members of the General Assembly will return to the Capitol for a veto session. That is going to happen. And we have every indication that they will attempt to override my vetoes on these bills, which passed with overwhelming numbers in both the House and Senate. Together, we must send a loud, clear, and united message that efforts to erode the progress we've made over the last 8 decades and the values enshrined in our Constitution, those efforts to erode it will not win. So on behalf of our children and our grandchildren, and all Missourians for generations to come, quite simply, we will fight back, and with your help, we will win. So I want to thank once again the conservation staff, the Conservation Commission, for allowing me to be here. I'm going to visit with folks for a couple minutes. If the press wants me, they'll set up out here. I haven't said anything overly controversial or newsworthy, it doesn't feel like to me, but we'll see. I just really appreciate and have come to appreciate more how right this template is and how designed it is to appropriately, with a long-term vision, make the important resource decisions involving wildlife for our state. And now is not the time to erode it. Thank you, and God bless.